Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Bas and today I'm going to challenge myself to something new. I was browsing through the manual of my Knittax knitting machine and I came across an instruction to knit Fair Isle. Because my Knittax machine is a simple machine, the Fair Isle is selected by hand and requires multiple passes of the carriage. So let's see if I can knit a hat with a Fair Isle motif. So this is the manual. It's all in Dutch because I'm from the Netherlands and I can read Dutch. But basically I came across this motif, which should knit up like this, with the instruction on how to pass the carriage and what knobs to use and when, and how many passes to make with each color. So I'm going to study this part, I'm going to make the design and we'll get started. This is the yarn I want to use. I want to make a hat in blue and white color. White for the stars, blue for the rest of the hat. It's a standard acrylic yarn, 50 grams on a ball, 199 meters. And I have knitted with this yarn before and I have a gauge of 27 stitches and 40 rows in 10 by 10 centimeters. So I can calculate my pattern. For the design I want to make a basic hat with a ribbing and a pom-pom. I want to make it in blue color and I want the motif around here. To knit a design like this, you knit a basic rectangle, you start with ribbing and then you sew the sides and you gather the top, and that's your basic hat. For the size I want to knit is, I know my gauge. I want the circumference about 54 centimeters and I want the height of my hat about 28 centimeters. With the gauge from the yarn I have, I can calculate the stitches and rows I need to knit. Let's get started. I have studied the instructions and I have recalculated design on a bigger scale to make it easier for myself, and now I'm going to test it first to see if it's successful. According to the instructions, I'm going to have to use these knobs. You can push them down and you can pull them up, and they enable you to knit the Fair Isle motif. For this test swatch, I'm selecting 18 needles on the left of 0 and 18 needles on the right of 0. Then I push all my needles into working position. I lay in the yarn and I take my carriage across. Open cast on. I knit a few rows to get started. I'm going to knit first 2 rows in the contrasting color, in this case white. When I take my motif, the contrasting yarn, these 6 needles and these 6 needles should be put into hold. I have a really handy tool, it's from Knittax and you can select needles easily. So I'm going to select these needles, lift up both levers for the main color. Then you take the carriage across twice. Now main yarn is knit. Now I press the knob away from the knitting and I take my other color across. Same on the other side. Both knobs in upper position. take my carriage across twice with main yarn and then press the knob away from the knitting and take across with the contrasting yarn. Let's see what we've got. Oh, that's very cool. I do think I've made several mistakes. Actually, I've made a lot of mistakes. Let's evaluate. First of all, the carriage. The knobs on the carriage and the settings were not as hard as I expected. It's just getting a routine. Second, the selecting of the needles. Well, I thought I was doing it perfectly, but it turns out I didn't. What do I learn from that? Pay really close attention. Check, double check, don't get distracted. The difficult part, at least for me, is in selecting the right needles. And third, the Fair Isle part is way less stretchy than the stockinette part. So for the actual head, I'm going to knit the Fair Isle 2 tensions higher than I'm going to knit the rest of the head. So with that in mind, learned a lot. That's exactly why we make test swatches. I'm confident the head will go better than my test swatch. So let's go. And I select 73 needles on the left and 73 needles on the right. I make sure that all the latches of the main bed needles are open. I'm checking that the latches from the ribber needles are all closed. And I'm adding the ribber needles in between the main bed needles. Main bed needles into working position. I take my carriage across to the left. Now all my needles are perfectly aligned. I take my blue yarn and I start to wrap the needles to cast on for 1 by 1 rib. Main bed needles counterclockwise, ribber needles clockwise. I take my main bed carriage across. So all the yarn falls behind the needle latches. I lay my yarn into the ribber needles and I take my ribber carriage across. Now transfer all the stitches from the ribber to the main bed. Remove the ribber. And there we have our ribbing. Now I'm going to knit 2 rows in blue yarn. Two rows in white yarn. Okay, so I've made my ribbing, 2 rows of blue, 2 rows of white. Now I have to start my Fair Isle motif. But because this is my first time Fair Isling on this machine, I'm a bit concerned that it's not going to go great right from the start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit this off on waste yarn, rehang it on the machine, and if my Fair Isle motif fails, I can frog it and go back to this stage so I don't have to knit the ribbing again. 10 rows of waste yarn. and now rehang it on the machine. Push the knitting under the sinkers. And now I can continue with the Fair Isle motif. The knobs in upward position, row counter on 0. First I knit the main yarn into the needle hooks. Now I push the remaining needles back into working position. And I'm going to knit them with the contrasting color. That's my first row of Fair Isle. Second row. I lay in my main color yarn. I push both knobs down and I take my carriage across twice. What just happened here? So I made a mistake, all my needles dropped the stitches, so that's impossible for me to fix. Since this is row 2, I'm going to start over. I should have put both knobs in the upper position and I pushed them both down. So the second pass, I threw all the yarn off the needles. I'm just really happy that I knitted my ribbing on waste yarn so I can start again from the ribbing. Let's try again. So push up. Push the needles back into working position. Lay in the white yarn and take the carriage across. Blue yarn. Now all the Fair Isle is done. And I continue with 2 rows of white and then the rest of the hat in blue. So now I'm knitting 75 more rows. Okay, because this is a lot of fabric to gather for the crown, I'm going to thin out the stitches and I'm going to put the yarn on every other needle. Now put all the needles back into work, lay in the yarn and take my carriage across. And I do it for 4 rows. And now I take my knitting off. I take my yarn end and thread it through a needle. And I'm going to sew it through all the stitches, taking the work off the machine. This way I can easily gather the top of the head. Now take a look at what we've made. And here is the knitting off the machine. First of all, let me get rid of the waste yarn. I'm really happy I knit the Fair Isle motif 2 stitch sizes higher than the normal stocking stitch, because now the stretch is the same. And I'm going to gather the top and make a few extra stitches to secure it. And now I'm going to mattress stitch the side seam closed. And finally I'm going to sew the ribbing closed from the bottom. So when I weave in my ends around here and not around here. Final step, let's make a pom-pom. I have a simple pom-pom maker and I'm going to wrap a pom-pom. Close the pom-pom maker, cut the pom-pom open, wrap the yarn around twice and make a knot. Okay, so now my hat is finished. I'm very happy with it. Okay, so about this project. The Fair Isle part on this simple knitting machine was actually not that difficult. It's just knowing what knobs to push and what knobs to pull at the right time. The most difficult part actually was constantly being very alert and aware of what needles to select and what needles not to select. And it worked out fine. I only failed once, so I had to frog only a few rows, and then because I knitted my ribbing on waste yarn, I could rehang it on the machine and continue from there. So I'm very happy I did that. And when paying very close attention, it's really fun to knit a Fair Isle motif on a simple knitting machine. At least I think so. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. I wish you happy knitting and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!